The new law asterisk, the sky was quiet when the ships first arrived. They did not make sound, they did not show weapons, they only floated above cities. Like giant silent birds watching, waiting, glowing with blue light. People were scared, people always get scared when they see something new, but the government said not to worry. The government said they came in peace. The government said they wanted to help. The aliens called themselves the Zareen, tall and thin, with soft blue skin and bright silver eyes. They looked human, but they were not. They moved like water and spoke in calm voices that felt like music. To build trust, the world leaders made a plan. Every home would get one Zareen assistant. The Zareen would help with cleaning, cooking, watching, learning. It was called the Harmony Project, and it became law. Jared was a quiet man. He lived alone in a small town. He worked at a garage fixing cars and engines. He did not talk much and did not want trouble. One morning, he opened his door and there she was. Her name was Nix. She stood tall and still, her eyes shining like stars, her hands folded like she was praying. She did not smile. She only said in a soft voice, "Hello, I am your assigned Zareen." Jared did not know what to say. He stepped aside. She entered the house and looked around like a curious cat, touching walls, smelling air, watching everything. At first she did nothing strange. She cleaned dishes, cooked food, swept the floor. But she also watched him closely, too closely. She asked questions about small things like, why do you keep shoes at the door? Or why do you drink coffee in silence? Jared shrugged. He never had answers for such questions. At night he noticed something odd. She did not sleep. She stood in the living room staring at the ceiling. Sometimes she hummed songs in a strange language, and her skin glowed very faintly like moonlight on water. 3 days later, Jared received a message on his old tablet. It came from an unknown source. The screen flickered and a warning appeared. In plain words, they are not just maids, they are monitors, and her season is coming. Jared blinked. He tried to read it again, but the message disappeared. The tablet shut off and never turned on again. He looked at Nix that night. She stood near the window. Her eyes closed, her hands open to the air, like she was feeling something invisible. The next morning Jared asked her directly, "What do you want?" She tilted her head and said, "I want to understand." He said, "Understand what?" She smiled slightly. "Everything." That night he woke up at 2 in the morning. He heard something outside. He walked slowly to the back door and opened it quietly. Nix was standing in the garden alone under the full moon, her arms raised, her eyes glowing. She was speaking words not in English. The language sounded soft and fast like wind through glass. Jared did not move. He only watched. She stopped speaking, suddenly turned her head and looked at him. "You heard me," she said in a calm voice. "What were you saying?" he asked. She walked towards him. Slowly, "I was calling," she said. Calling who? She did not answer. She only looked up at the stars. Next day, Jared tried to report it. He called the Harmony Project helpline. A cold voice replied, "Please give your identification number." He gave it. The voice said, "Your Zareen is within acceptable behavior limits," he said, "but she's changing." The voice paused and said, "Change is part of learning." Goodbye. The line went dead. Jared sat in silence, his fingers shaking. He felt something was wrong. Something was coming, something no one was talking about. Later that evening, he found something in Nix's room, a small glowing stone with carvings in her language. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat. When he touched it, a whisper entered his mind, a voice not his. "Oh, do not run. She will choose soon." He dropped the stone and backed away, his heart racing. That night, Nix made dinner. Without speaking, she placed the plate in front of him and sat across the table watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. He did not eat. He asked, "What happens when you choose someone?" She said softly, "It cannot be stopped once it begins." Jared stood up and walked out of the house, but the street was empty. Too quiet, no wind, no cars, no people, just silence. He turned back towards the house and saw her still sitting, still watching, and above them in the sky, a small blue light blinked once, then vanished. Jared felt a chill in his bones. He looked at Nix through the window, and for the first time he wondered if she was the one in control, or if she was just following something older and deeper than choice. Asterisk. The morning sun rose slow and soft, but the air around the house felt heavy, like something was watching, something was waiting. The wind did not move. The birds did not sing. The silence felt thick. Jared sat at the table with cold coffee in his hands, and eyes fixed on the hallway where Nix had gone hours ago. She had not returned. She said she needed time to think. She had started doing that more often now, standing in corners, sitting without blinking, staring at walls, whispering things that sounded like dreams. Used to think she was just quiet. Now he was sure something inside her had changed. Yesterday, she cooked the same meal twice without noticing and placed both plates in front of him, and when he asked her about it, she smiled like a child who forgot what game she was playing. Had received another message, this time written on paper, left inside his garage, under a broken tire. No name, no signature, just 6 words once. They bond, they never leave. Jared read it again and again, and each time the words felt heavier, like a chain wrapping tighter around his chest. He looked at Nix's room. He wanted to open the door and search, but a strange fear held him back. Not fear of being caught, fear of what he might find. She had started building something in the garage, using parts he never bought, wires that shimmered like silver, hair tools that hummed when touched, and shapes that bent light around them. When he asked her what she was making, she said softly, "I am preparing for what is natural." He had no idea what she meant, but she said it like it was obvious, like he was the one who did not understand how nature worked. That night he tried to call someone, anyone, but the line kept repeating the same message: all systems are currently busy. Please wait. He waited for hours, but the voice never changed. He left the phone on the floor and walked outside for air, but stopped when he saw her standing on the roof, not moving. Arms by her side, eyes closed, head tilted back like she was listening to something deep underground. He shouted her name once, and she opened her eyes slowly and came down without a word. She sat in her chair and turned on the television, but the screen only showed static. Jared sat across from her and asked, "Are you sick?" She looked at him with confusion, like the word had no meaning, and said, "I am not broken, I am blooming." That night he found new marks on his arms, small and red like pinpricks, in a perfect line. He had not noticed them before, but now they burned softly under his skin. He checked all the rooms and every window and found nothing and no one and no reason for these marks. Asked her in the morning where they came from. She looked away and whispered, "I needed to know if you were ready for what he asked." She walked past him with no answer. He started feeling like he was inside a dream, one where time moved sideways and gravity did not work. The same things around the house began to change slowly. The lights flickered when she walked by. The mirror in the hallway showed her reflection blinking out for a second, and the fridge stayed cold, even when unplugged. He could not prove any of it, not with words, not with pictures. Everything returned to normal the moment he tried to share it. Then one night he found her standing in the garage again, surrounded by her strange device, wires wrapped around her arms. Humming louder, now almost alive, he shouted for her to stop, and she turned to him, eyes glowing with a soft gold light. Her face was calm, but something behind her smile looked ancient and wild. She said in a voice that was not fully hers, "I did not choose this place, but I chose you." He stepped back and said, "I never agreed." She touched his arm and whispered, "Agreement is not part of the cycle." He pulled away and ran back into the house, his heart beating like thunder, his breath short and sharp. He locked every door, every window, and sat in the corner of his room holding a wrench in his hand and listening for footsteps. Hours passed and nothing happened. The silence grew deeper. In the morning he stepped outside and looked around and saw something that made him freeze. His car was open, the engine pulled apart, every piece laid neatly on the ground in perfect order, like someone had studied it and put it back for display. He ran to the neighbors, but their house was empty. Whole street looked like it had been abandoned, but all the doors were closed and all the lights were on. He stood in the middle of the road with wind brushing his face and felt the world tilt slightly. He walked back to the house slowly. Nix stood at the door holding a note in her hand. She gave it to him and stepped aside. He opened it and read only 2 lines. "Please do not run again. This is not danger. This is destiny." She looked at him like she was waiting for him to understand, and in that moment, Jared realized she was not hiding from him. She was waiting for him to decide. Jared woke up with a sharp pain in his head and a strange sound in his ears like water dripping in a metal room. He sat up slowly and saw that the curtains were open and sunlight was falling directly on the floor in a perfect circle, and Nyx was sitting on the chair near his bed, watching him with eyes that did not blink. He asked what time it was, and she replied softly that time was not important anymore because something inside her had started. Something she could not control, something older than rules, and older than peace treaties, and older than the world itself. He stared at her face and tried to understand what she meant, but her expression stayed calm and her voice stayed soft as she said the words that would change everything. My season has begun. The words echoed in the room like a whisper from the sky, and Jared felt the weight of them before he understood their meaning. He stood up too quickly and stumbled against the wall, his hands shaking and his breath caught between fear and disbelief. He remembered the messages, the warnings, the strange lights and the glowing stone and the marks on his skin, and now it all made sense, or at least it pointed in one direction. She was not here just to clean and learn, she was here to choose, and now she had chosen. Jared asked her what the season meant, and she stood up slowly and walked toward him, each step quiet as snow falling, and said in a voice that felt like both comfort and danger, "It is when we bond, and it is when we create, and it is when we become more than one." He said he never agreed to any of this, and she stopped right in front of him with her head slightly tilted and said, "Consent is a human word." The silence between them felt like it could break mountains. And Jared turned away and walked into the hallway, his mind racing with thoughts that had no shape and fear that had no name. He opened the front door and saw that the street was still empty. No people, no cars, no voices, just quiet houses and blue sky and something in the air that felt unnatural. He ran to his car and saw it still broken, every part placed carefully on the driveway, like a puzzle waiting for a player who would never come. He shouted for help, but no one answered, and when he looked back at his house, Nyx was standing at the door, holding something in her hand, a small glass device with light moving inside, like liquid stars. She said it was her mating beacon, and that it had activated the moment she felt the connection between them, and that soon others would hear it and understand what she had done, and some would come to stop her. And some would come to witness. Jared felt his chest tighten as he asked what kind of connection she was talking about, and she walked to him and placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "When I saw you I felt calm, and when you spoke I listened, and when you touched my hand I did not pull away." He stepped back and shouted that it was not real, that she was making it all up, that he was just a man who wanted peace and quiet and a normal life. And she smiled gently and said, "So did I." Later that day, Jared found a news report hidden deep in the tablet memory, a video uploaded by someone who looked terrified and tired and who spoke in broken sentences about the Zerine and the truth behind the Harmony Project. He said the government made a deal. They promised Earth access to alien technology in return for something sacred, something biological, something the Zerine called the right. Each Zerine Maid was not only a helper, but a seeker, and once their season began, they would find a human match and begin the bonding process, and once it started, it could not be undone without damage to both sides. Jared turned off the video and stared at the wall, trying to remember who he was before all this began, and what he believed and what he trusted, and what part of him still wanted to run. Nyx came in quietly and said that she could feel his fear and that she did not want to hurt him, and that she had chosen him because something in her told her he was different, not just kind but awake. He asked her what would happen if he said no, and she looked down and said, "Then I will suffer and you will forget me, but the bond will remain unfinished. And I will not return to my kind, and I will not move forward, and neither will you." Walked outside and sat on the steps looking at the sky and wondering if the stars were watching, and if they cared, and if they remembered every time a bond like this was refused. Then he felt a wave of warmth pass through him, not from the sun and not from fear, but something else, something like memory, and he turned around and saw Nyx standing silently with tears on her face. She said, "I do not want to take I want to share, and Jared knew that the season was not just about claiming. It was about choosing, and now the choice was his to make. The night came slower than usual, and the sky looked heavier, like it was pressing down on the house, like it knew what was happening inside, and it did not want to watch, but it could not look away. Jared sat on the floor of his room with his back against the wall, and his eyes wide open, as if sleep would betray him, as if closing his eyes would mean giving in to something. He still did not understand. Nyx was in the living room, sitting in complete silence, her body still, her face calm, her hands resting on her knees, like a statue waiting for a signal from the stars. He had spent the whole day thinking about her, thinking about what she said, thinking about what he felt, and thinking about what it all meant. And no matter how hard he tried, the same question kept coming back. Was this real, or was it control? The bond she spoke of sounded like love, but it also sounded like destiny, and Jared never liked the idea of something being decided for him, not by government, not by fate, and not by someone with silver eyes and ancient blood. He walked into the kitchen and turned on the sink just to hear something that made sense. The sound of water was normal, it was safe, it was human. He looked at the door and thought about running again, but he remembered the empty streets, the missing neighbors, the broken car, the messages and the warning that came from nowhere, and from someone who probably was gone by now. He had no map, no plan, and no help. He only had her and the thing growing between them like a storm in slow motion. He stepped into the living room and looked at her and asked in a low voice, "Why?" Mesh opened her eyes and answered without pause, "Because I felt something that was not programmed, because I looked at you, and my season responded, but my heart also responded, and that does not always happen, and when it does we follow it because we are made that way, but we also choose it when it is strong enough." He sat down across from her and said he still did not understand what it meant to be chosen. She said it meant she would protect him, even if it hurt her. It meant she would not leave him, even if the sky fell. It meant that her body and her mind and her future were now tied to his, and that this was not a trap, this was a transformation. He said, "What if I say no?" She closed her eyes again and said, "Then I will accept it, but I will also break. And when I break, it will echo, and when it echoes, they will come, and they will not be like me. They will not ask. They will not feel. They will only complete what was started." Jared looked away and felt the weight of her words press down on his chest like stone, and he wondered what kind of world had rules like this, and who wrote them, and why no one ever warned the people who had to live under them. He asked her how much time he had. She said not much. Then the ground shook gently, not like an earthquake, but like a warning from something beneath the surface, something old and rising. Lights flickered once and then again, and then stayed on but dim, like the house itself was holding its breath. Nyx stood up slowly and said, "They have found us." Jared asked who she meant, and she looked at him and said, "The ones who do not care about choice, the ones who still follow the first law, the ones who take without asking, because their season never ends." He looked out the window and saw 3 figures walking down the street, not human, not like Nyx either. Their movements were wrong, their bodies too straight, and their heads turning too fast. He stepped back, and Nyx put herself between him and the door and said, "You need to decide now, because if I bond, we are stronger, and if I do not, I will still fight, but I will be weaker, and you will be alone." Jared felt the moment hanging in the air like a thread that could snap with one wrong breath, and he looked at her face, and he did not see a maid, and he did not see a threat, and he did not see an alien. He saw someone who was afraid to hurt him, someone who had power but also pain, someone who had been sent here with orders but chose to stay with feeling. He reached out and touched her hand, and she gasped like a light had turned on inside her, and he said he was not ready to love, but he was ready to fight beside her. She smiled, and her skin began to glow brighter than ever, not like before, not soft and quiet, but like fire waking up for the first time. Outside, the 3 figures stopped walking and turned their heads as if they felt something shift, as if they knew the bond had started. Stepped forward, and Nyx looked at him with something new in her eyes, not mission, not instinct, but pride. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew he would not face it. Alone, and for the first time he felt something close to belief. The world outside had changed, and Jared could feel it in the way the air moved slower, in the way the ground felt softer, and in the way Nyx walked beside him with silence that held meaning. Not fear. They had left the house before sunrise when the Fates' light stopped working, and the sky had turned a shade of blue that did not look like morning and did not look like night, something in between something. Watching Nyx said they needed answers, not guesses and not feelings, but real answers, and the only place to find them was the Harmony Project archive, hidden beneath the city, where no one was allowed to go without a pass, without rank, without silence. They walked through empty streets where cars stood without drivers, and where traffic lights blinked for ghosts, where every window was closed and every door seemed to breathe slow, like it knew who was passing by. Jared asked how deep the truth was, and Nyx said deeper than science, deeper than policy, deeper than anything made by human hands. They reached the old metro station where the trains no longer ran, but the air still smelled like oil and rust and forgotten conversations. Nyx placed her hand on the wall, and the wall opened not like a door, but like skin peeling back to reveal bone. And behind it was a tunnel filled with soft light and low sound like a heartbeat from underground. They walked for a long time without speaking, because the space did not want words, and the silence was part of the passage. Finally they reached a steel gate, and behind it was the archive, the place where the truth was buried and locked and watched by machines that once served people, but now only served the system. Nyx stepped forward and looked into the scanner and said her name, and the gate opened. Like it was afraid to deny her. Inside, the walls were covered in screens and symbols that changed every second, showing data from all over the planet, showing faces of humans, showing movements of Zareen, showing maps of places that no longer had names. Jared walked through the rows of consoles and asked why this place was never shown to the public, and Nyx said because lies are easier to feed than truth, and control is easier to sell than freedom. She pulled out a file, not paper, not digital, but something in between, a living record, something warm to the touch and glowing with memory. She said this is the core of the agreement, the pact made between Earth and the Zareen, something signed not by hope, but by desperation. The Earth was dying back then, not just from climate or war, but from disconnection. People were lost, angry, hollow. The leaders begged for help, and the Zareen offered a gift with a price. The Zareen would give energy solutions, medical technology, food systems, and learning algorithms. But in return they asked for integration, not of mind, not of culture, but of biology. They believed their species had grown cold, too logical, too empty. They needed something more, something human, something emotional. They saw humans as the fire they had lost, and they wanted to bring that fire back. The Harmony program was never about service. It was about selection. Each Zareen sent to Earth was chosen for one task: to find a match and the bond, and to share not just flesh but thought, not just life, but evolution. Jared stared at the words and the images and the recorded voices of politicians promising peace while knowing the full deal. He asked why people were not told, and Nyx said because no one would agree to be chosen if they knew the cost. Asked what happens if the bond fails, and she looked down and said, then pain follows pain in the Zareen. Pain in the human, pain in the world. The archive suddenly blinked with a red warning, and Nyx turned to a nearby screen showing incoming units. Not human, not peaceful, not slow. They had been found. She said they must leave now, and Jared asked if they could take the file, and she said no, because the file was alive and could only stay in the archive, but she could carry what she saw, what she knew, what she remembered. As they ran back through the tunnels, the lights began to break, one by one behind them, like footsteps made of electricity and metal. They reached the surface, and the sun had changed again, now brighter, but without heat, and the clouds spun in slow circles as if pulled by something above. Jared stopped and looked at the world and asked if it could ever go back, and Nyx said no, because the truth once touched never fades. They stood near the broken statue in the city square, once built for peace ceremonies, now covered in vines and forgotten prayers. She said there are others like us, bonded, hiding Running, surviving, waiting for the right time. Jared asked what time that was. She said soon, because the secret was no longer hidden, and secrets when exposed do not fade, they spread. Asterisk. The night was louder than the city had ever been, but not because of sound, not because of voices or machines or sirens. It was loud with pressure, loud with tension, loud with something alive that wanted to break free from the dark. Jared and Nyx ran through the old tunnel system, where shadows moved like whispers, and the air smelled of dust and memories that no longer had names, and every step echoed like footsteps on the edge of a storm behind them. The sound of metal was growing, not like footsteps, not like breathing, but like something hunting with hunger, not for blood, but for silence. Nyx said they were tracking the signal from the archive, not just from her presence, but from the activation of truth, because truth once awakened sends ripples through all connected minds. Jared asked if they would make it out, and Nyx said survival was never promised, only choice. And now the path split into two, not by roads, but by what they would become. They reached an opening where the tunnel led into an old power station, abandoned for years, but still holding the warmth of forgotten systems and the ghosts of lights that once guided men who had no idea what would come after them. Closed the doors with a wave of her hand and sat on the floor, her body shaking, not from fear, but from the bond beginning to bloom faster than expected. She said the beacon inside her was no longer calling for others. It was now reacting to him, reacting to Jared, reacting to his acceptance, his refusal, his questions, his closeness. Jared knelt beside her and asked if it could be stopped, and she looked at him, not with panic, but with softness, and said not stopped, but reshaped if both minds agreed and both hearts accepted, not out of duty, but out of truth. Asked what reshaping meant, and she touched her chest and said it meant merging, not in flesh, not in mind, but in understanding. If you accept me, I change, and if I accept you, you change, and the change is not just survival, it is creation. And once we create, the system cannot control us, because it does not know how to control what it did not design. Jared looked at his hands and remembered how they used to be steady when fixing engines, when solving small problems, when living a quiet life. Now they trembled, not from fear, but from the edge of something new, something sacred, something that could be called love or trust or surrender. Walls of the station trembled once, and the lights flickered, and the ground buzzed with footsteps of those who did not want this bond to complete, because it was not part of the original plan. Nyx said they would come fast and they would come cruel, because failure of containment is a threat to the program, and threats are never allowed to escape. Jared stood up and said he was done running. He had seen the files, he had seen the lies, he had seen the real reason behind the Harmony Project, and he was tired of being part of a lie. She looked at him and reached for his hand, and when he took it, the room changed, the air changed, the light shifted from cold to warm, from gray to gold, from old to new. He saw something behind his eyes, a flash, a memory that was not his, a mountain under twin moons, a field of glowing trees, a laugh that belonged to Nyx, a time before pain, a time before this mission. He felt her heart not beating like his, but pulsing like a song, and in that moment he knew she was not only a visitor, she was a survivor of a lost people who were searching for something to make them feel again, and he could either be her mirror or her end. Jared said yes, and the bond started, not with sound, not with touch, but with a wave that moved through both of them, like a story being written by the stars. The machines outside stopped moving for 1 second, just 1 second, but it was enough. Nyx opened her eyes, and they were brighter than before, filled with something fierce and beautiful, something unprogrammed, something free. She stood, and her voice was no longer just soft, it was strong. And when she spoke, the walls of the power station responded by glowing with the same golden light. Jared stepped beside her and felt nothing but calm, not the calm of quiet, but the calm of purpose. The doors opened not from force, but from surrender, and the ones sent to capture them stepped back, not in fear, but in confusion. They did not understand what they were seeing, because this was not protocol. This was evolution. Nyx raised her hand and said, "We are not your subjects. We are not your tools. We are the future you tried to control, and now we stand outside your design. Enemy did not fire. They only watched as the light spread through the ground and into the sky like a signal, like a new code rewriting everything it touched. Jared knew they could not undo what had been done, and he did not want to, because for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not running, not hiding, not surviving, becoming. The sky above the city no longer looked like it used to. The stars had changed shape. The clouds moved with thought, not with wind, and something deep in the earth pulsed like a sleeping heart finally waking. Jared stood on the rooftop of the old government tower, watching the streets below, watching the people gather, not in fear, not in silence, but in something new, something rising, something that felt like remembering. Beside him, Nick stood with her eyes closed, her hands open, her body glowing, not with power, but with peace, the kind of peace that comes after breaking, not before. The bond between them had changed more than just the two of them. It had sent a signal through every Zyrene, every bonded human, every watcher hiding in shadows, every rebel who had once believed they were alone. Now they were not alone. Now the silence had been broken. Now the system had been cracked, and the rules that once held everything in place had started to fall like leaves from a tree. No longer afraid of winter news spread faster than machines could stop it. Faces appeared on screens, voices filled the streets, messages written in fire, written in rain, written in memory. We are not property, we are not programs, we are the new order. The old leaders tried to respond. They called it a glitch, they called it rebellion, they called it infection. But none of their words mattered, because their voices no longer echoed, their orders no longer reached. The people had chosen. The bonded stood in the open, hand in hand, thought in thought, heart beside heart. Some humans still feared, still doubted, still held tight to the old ways, but even they could feel the change in the air, the warmth in the ground, the pull in their blood. Jared walked through the hallways of the tower, where the Harmony Project had once been designed, where laws had been signed, where secrets had been sealed, and now those walls were covered in drawings, made by children who had seen Zyrene not as threats, but as friends. He passed rooms filled with both species learning together, eating together, healing together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Nix told him that the old Zyrene Council had collapsed the moment the bond echoed across the stars, not from war, not from anger, but from understanding. They had forgotten how to feel, and now they remembered. They had built the program to fix themselves, and in doing so, they had tried to control love. But love does not bend to design, and love does not follow orders. Jared stood before a crowd of thousands on the day. The sky turned gold, not from the sun, but from the signal finally reaching its last gate. He did not speak like a hero. He did not speak like a soldier. He spoke like a man who had seen something sacred and lived to tell. Told them the truth. He told them that trust is not given, it is grown. He told them that fear is not protection, it is a cage. He told them that the old world had needed change, and the new world would need courage. Nick stood beside him, not as his protector, not as his maid, but as his equal. And when she placed her hand in his, the crowd lifted their hands too, not as worship, not as surrender, but as unity. And in that moment, the earth felt whole, not perfect, not finished, but whole. The new laws were not written in books, they were written in choice, written in shared meals, written in long walks at night, where Zyrene and human children played under two moons without anyone telling them who they were supposed to be. No more forced bonds, no more silent watchers, no more fake peace. Now there was only one rule: choose with your whole being. Jared visited the ruins of the Harmony Center, where the first files had been made, where the lies had been wrapped in pretty words, and he lit a fire. There, not to destroy, but to warm the soil. He planted a seed. Nyx had given him a seed from her world, something that only grew when touched by two hands, one from each kind. He did not wait for it to grow, he simply walked away, knowing that someone else would water it, someone else would sit beside it, someone else would name it. Because this was not his ending, it was everyone's beginning. Years later, people would tell stories of the man who accepted the bond, not because he was chosen, but because He chose back. They would speak of Nyx not as an invader, but as the first light of the second dawn. The world would change again and again, but the memory would remain of the day. Two minds became one future, and Earth finally became more than a planet. It became a promise.